Welcome to the Amplifying Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Tara Lehman, a partner, coach, and consultant at my Coaching Business Services, which is home to our Amplifying Leadership division. This podcast is your space to expand your leadership with meaningful stories, practical wisdom, and conversations that remind you you're not leading alone. To learn more about our leadership services and the Amplifying Leadership Circle community, please visit us anytime at amplifyingleadership.ca. Today, I am welcoming Brian Root, a fractional CPO at Rooted in Product. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tara. Pleasure to be here.
So before we get started talking about fractional executive leadership, can you tell us a little bit about your leadership story or where you came from?
Yeah, so I'll give a little bit of my history briefly, at least. I think I was put in a dubiously privileged position, I guess, of being put into a position of leading a team about, I think it was literally 2-3 months into my first role out of college.
Oh, wow.
This was at
That's fast.
Yes, it was at a somewhat startup, basically clothing company. Unfortunately, no longer exists, but they were very keen, obviously, to advance people rapidly, clearly.
Mm-hmm.
But that put me into a position where I was, I think, still literally 21. I'd never really led much of anything. I'd done some things in college, certainly, but that's a very different flavor. And suddenly I was in charge of a team of people, right? And so I think that's the beginning of maybe where my leadership epiphanies started happening. I wouldn't say I was a leader at that
Yes.
time. In fact, I think that I probably made every mistake possible, right, over the first 2, 3, 4 years of in air quotes being a leader, right? I think back to some of the things I was doing at that time, right? It was really just kind of mimicking the people who were leading me or the people that I saw in leadership positions. Not to bash on people who are not in the conversation, but unfortunately, I think some of the people that I had kind of as archetypes at that company were not very effective leaders, right? There were people who were much more of kind of the command and control, like I've been put into this position, therefore you need to respect me, rather than people who had actually earned that. And so that was kind of what I mimicked, right? Like I had other 21-year-olds working for me, right? I'd basically say
Yes.
like, I believe in you, like you can do this, I think you just need to buckle down. And then, when they didn't, I would basically just jump in immediately, do their work for them, thinking that I was like showing them, what good quality it looked like. But really I was just, amplifying my own workload, right? And I think they probably learned that
exactly.
at some point, that they could just not really do their work, and I would jump in and do it for them. So that led to me, I think, on one hand, kind of burning out very clearly at that company, right? Like that was not a position where I was able to sustain that way of working. It was both emotionally draining, but also realistically physically draining, right? To be working that hard. But the flip side of that was I think it really, opened my eyes to wanting to be in leadership positions, right? I think it was kind of an awareness of there's something here that I enjoy, candidly, the kind of the responsibility of being in the position of being able to make decisions, which to me doesn't mean making them by myself and everybody else is just falling in line, but really like I think some people gravitate towards that. That sense of ownership, and some people don't, right? And I think for myself, absolutely. It was very clearly seeing I want to put myself in these positions, but I'm doing a terrible job at it. So how do I get better, right? So I think a lot of the roles, the opportunities that I then kind of pursued from there were certainly explicitly management positions, right, where I could continue to flex that muscle, learn how to lead people. But I think if I were, to kind of summarize my career path from that initial job, it was better companies with better training programs for, more formalized leadership training. So I was able to pick up a lot of, much better skills after that point. Subsequently went to business school. I had really an intention there of trying to learn as much as possible as I could about leading people. Again, it was kind of a low stakes place, if you will, right? So again, I think I did a lot of things that probably I would not care to repeat in some of the volunteer leadership positions I took on, but I learned a lot right from that.
Yeah.
And I think where that's developed, in subsequent roles, I was at Amazon for a while, had some leadership positions at Walmart Labs, then a handful of startups after that. I've been able to over that time develop more into I think a leader that I view myself as a more of a facilitator, right? My job
Hmm.
is to put the people who work for me in the best possible position for them to have the most impact, for them to, frankly, get the most exposure, right, for the
Hmm.
impact that they have, right, get full credit for the work they're doing. But my role is really to develop and to make sure that hopefully I'm hiring really smart people. How do I get them into
Hmm.
positions where they are maximizing their own talents? Less so make myself look good, make all the decisions, any of those things.
Yeah.
Probably I was doing more so earlier in my career. So that's obviously been a much more fulfilling
Hmm.
path, right? I've been able to develop a lot of really smart, really talented people over the last, call it 10 years. I think one of the things that I honestly take the most pride in is when I look at some of the people that I've hired at, kind of a senior and below level and where they are right now. I think last count it was 12 or 13 people that I've hired who now have VP or C-suite titles, right?
Excellent. Yeah.
Which to me says, hey, I identified talent pretty well and I developed that
Yeah.
talent pretty well. I cannot take full credit at all for any of their, careers, but
Hmm.
I think at least I can feel good about not having inhibited them. Let's say that at the
Yeah.
minimum, right? So I think that colors certainly the leadership journey that I've been on. Today I am a fractional CPO, as you already mentioned, right? And my role to, from some angles at least, is to come in and have executive authority and leadership responsibility on a limited set of hours with, a limited
Hmm.
set of exposure and context to a lot of the people I'm working with. So, you know, that really means I have to take kind of everything I've learned, particularly over the last 10 years about how to do all this well, right?
Hmm.
And apply it in a very rapid and effective manner. So,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily been an intentional journey for me throughout the entirety of that, but I think, the skills that I've learned along the way certainly benefit me, in my current career.
I think it's a growth journey. That's what it was, growth and learning. And now
Yes. Yeah.
you're the one who can do it, right? So let's talk a little bit about what fractional leadership means. I mean, there's some people out in our audience who may not understand what fractional actually means. So you just started to explain it a little bit, but maybe
Yeah.
you can explain it a little bit more detail for our audience in case they're not sure.
Yeah, so fractional is a term. I think it's probably been around for better part of a decade, but it certainly has picked up steam in the last couple of years. Basically, just means, and this can apply to really any C-suite role, let's say, um, that you are an executive who works part-time hours, right? But in all other ways, you really should operate and should be treated as a core employee, right? You can manage people, you can and should make executive level decisions, you should actually be getting your hands dirty, to actually, to make not only decisions but drive
Hmm.
impact at the company. So really, the only thing that is different from being a full-time employee is, you're working less hours and you probably don't get, the healthcare and benefits that you might get otherwise.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but I think it sits a little bit in the middle ground between full-time employee and say consultant, right?
Hmm.
Where I think a lot of the time consultants and fractionals do get blurred together in ways that
Yeah.
aren't always necessarily productive. But whereas a consultant, you kind of are hiring, excuse me, on an hourly basis,
Hmm.
project scope. They probably are not actively managing people or actually
Hmm.
implementing any of the work that they're recommending doing. It's a much more active role to be a fractional, right? You are developing people, you are hiring people, you are actually doing the work, not to disparage
Yeah.
consultants, but yes,
Well, yeah, no, and thank you for defining that too, because consultants really is more project based in some cases. I mean,
yep,
like you said, you're not necessarily managing people, where the fractional is really you're doing the job, but you're
yep,
doing it part time. So, what are some of the challenges that organizations would have that they would even consider needing something like fractional? Like, I can imagine if they're a small organization and they need a
Yeah.
part-time CEO because they're a startup or something, that makes
Yep.
sense. What other times or challenges would organizations have that would require that fractional expertise?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's a couple of core ones. You kind of hit on the main use case, which is, I'd kind of summarize it as champagne problems, beer budget, right? Which is,
Yeah.
often smaller companies can't necessarily afford or some senses justify bringing on top tier executive talent,
Hmm.
but they recognize that they can really benefit from bringing in that talent and expertise and viewpoint on a limited set of hours, right? I
Hmm.
think there's a lot of kind of underlying issues and challenges that would lead to that scenario. But at a high level, that is kind of the main example. Other times would be if you have a let's call it a temporary gap, right? Somebody's going out on maternity leave or sick leave
Okay.
or something of
Hmm.
that nature, right? And you just need to plug a 3 to 6 month hole, right, in your kind of your organizational structure, right? You can hire a
Hmm.
fractional to come in and provide a relatively high degree of continuity during that time period, and there's an alignment of expectations, right? We know that we're coming in for a short period of time.
Hmm.
We have the skill sets ideally to drive impact very rapidly within that, so the organization kind of benefits from that continuity without any sort of awkward, how do
Yeah.
we unwind this, right? That's kind of
Yeah.
established from the start.
Excellent. So I'm kind of curious because when someone comes in as fractional, whether that be part-time or a temporary leave of absence for somebody or whatever,
Mhm.
the hiring and the firing or onboarding can be weird because the people that are being affected, let's say we need to let somebody go,
Yep.
they may not know you well. Maybe you're just newer to them or because you're only part-time. And that could feel a
Yep.
little bit strange saying, hey, Brian, sorry, I got to let you go. And Brian doesn't understand because I'm fractional why I'm doing
Yeah.
this. So how can fractional leaders overcome some of those things because they're big, right? I mean, they can
Yeah.
be very awkward. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts around that?
I think there's a couple aspects to that. So let's call it the more pragmatic side, right?
Hmm.
One of the advantages I think of hiring experienced, fractional executive is, I'll just speak from my personal experience. I've hired and fired. I don't know how many people. I mean, the ratio of hiring to firing is much
Yeah.
much bigger on the former side, to be clear. But
Yeah.
that's not a challenge that is new to me in any sense,
Hmm.
right? And I think one of the things that I've developed over the years, which I think is true for a lot of fractionals, is I can handle tough situations like that without really needing a lot of coaching context,
Hmm.
et cetera. So being put into a situation like that is not pleasant, to be clear, but we are certainly capable and competent, when it comes to handling those things. Let's call it the less pragmatic side, the more relational side, right? I think one of the aspects of coming into a fractional role that at least I've found to be true is if you're being tasked with coming in and saying like your first job is to fire this person, something's probably wrong. That
Yeah.
that
It's a
doesn't
red
sound like a
flag.
great situation, right?
Yeah.
And then you're being kind of used more as a pawn than a strategic partner in a lot
Hmm.
of senses, right? So I would frankly just be a little bit skeptical of that being the mandate of any role I came into, right? I think the healthier approach is to say basically, you've brought me in to solve problems, right? That is a solution that you perceive, right, to a problem. But first, I need to actually validate whether that's the real problem that you're seeing. I can say from experience, I've come into multiple engagements where there were people that were deemed to be underperforming, right? And it wasn't necessarily the case that I was being asked to fire them, but the
Hmm.
context was we hired this person, they're not working out. Like, can you help coach them, whatever it may be, right? And often, what I've found, not 100% of the time, but very often, it's not the person, right? It's the structure, it's the
Hmm.
context, it's the situation they've been placed into, right? So going into that situation and trying to assess what is wrong about uh, that context that is not allowing this person to be successful is often job number one, and that leads to then structural changes, cultural changes, coaching for that individual,
Yeah.
any number of things, right? And that's where my work begins, right? And,
Hmm.
yes, sometime that ends with, 3 to 6 months down the line. Hey, we put you in a better position. We made the expectations clear. We gave you all the resources you needed. And still not cutting it. And sure, now maybe we need to have,
Hmm.
some sort of a severance conversation. But that should be very much, a result of a lot of effort that I've already put in, not the first thing that
Hmm.
I'm doing.
Yeah. So I want to talk about something that you mentioned, which is something that I have pushed and pushed and pushed for people to understand. And I'm glad you mentioned it. A lot of times, the problems are not the people. The problems are something like you said, structure or process,
Yep.
training. It could be that they're told something and they're doing it right, but
Yep.
that's not what was supposed to happen. So, really doing that analysis, even for not even just fractional, but any leader who's looking at problems or they think someone's doing something incorrectly, let's find out why first, because that
Yeah.
may be a process issue. It may be a
Yep.
calendar issue. It's simple as, can we move the meeting by 15 minutes was one client that I had, and it worked
Mm.
perfectly. So it really can be a very simple or more process or structure focused, of course. And I think you're right. We definitely need to look into that. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. The other flavor of that, if you will, that I've seen crop up a lot is often you have, at these smaller companies who, are bringing in part-time fractionals, that you have situations like, domain expert, let's say PM or product designer, reporting to or communicating directly with the CEO whose, head is 30,000 feet
Already.
up, thinking
Yeah.
about a million other things, right? And there's a perception often on the part of the CEO, I made myself super clear, this person should know exactly what to do. Why aren't
Mm.
they doing it? And then I go talk to the PM or the designer, and they say, yeah, they told me to do a thing, but like I need 10 other pieces of context in order to understand how to do it right, because
Yeah,
there's nuance
exactly.
to all of this, right? Which I think if you are in those roles or have really properly led those roles, you do understand.
Hmm.
So a lot of the time, my role in that is to play somewhat of an intermediary, right? To try to
Hmm.
communicate to the CEO, here's all of the missing context that's preventing him from doing what you thought you told him to do,
Hmm.
and then often reciprocally talking to the senior level individual to say, here's how you need to communicate with the CEO, right? Like
Yeah.
advocate for what you need, you know,
Yes.
don't just sit there because the perception will be that the individual are doing a bad job, right? So a lot of the time, frankly, it does boil down just to communication issues.
Yes. Yeah. And it's interesting you say that because communication is something that I do training on for leaders or coaching through them because it is such a big problem. They think they're being clear, but really
Mhm.
they're not talking to the audience, so to speak, right? They're talking
Yep.
to whoever that you general. And I'm like, no, you got to talk to Tara in a way that Tara's going to understand you,
Yep.
right? Or whatever that is. So love that you brought that up. I want to pivot just a little bit because I want to talk
Yeah.
about when we step in as a fractional leader to our teams and how do we build the trust? Or even if
Yeah.
we are a leader and we're bringing in a fractional, how do we convince our team that there's trust here, that this is a good thing? You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
how do you see that working?
Yeah. So this is actually one of the less expected, more pleasant surprises of me that I've experienced since going fractional about a year and a half ago. Uh, I've always led teams going back to being 21, as I said, and
Yeah.
I had never led them in a context where they weren't formally reporting to me on the org chart. So I think this was one of the big unknowns. But one of the dynamics that I've consistently experienced now is people, and this is inclusive of CEOs, peers, people that are, formally or informally reporting to me on
Mhm.
the org chart as I come into these situations, seem to be so much more open and honest when you are a fractional versus when you are a
Mhm.
full-time employee. And I think that's because, when you're coming in full-time, like you've gone through this tremendously long, interview experience, usually,
Right.
talk to a million people. There's a lot of kind of preconceptions maybe that get built up,
Mhm.
both good and bad. But I think, also amongst your peers, there's, some element of often kind of defensiveness of, here's my area, stay out, or kind of
Mhm.
empire building, any of those things, right? That you kind of can see at some, not all, but some, corporate environments.
Mhm.
Uh, And I think what I've really experienced instead is when you come in as a fractional, it's clear that there's an expiration date, right? It may not know
Right.
when that is exactly, but like you're not going to be there forever. That's known,
Right.
right?
Yep. Yeah.
So it's very clear, and I can reinforce this with the way that I communicate when I'm, trying to understand. I'm not here to build an org. I'm not here to get promoted. I'm not here to do any of those things that might, threaten my peers or cause the CEO to, have a certain
Hmm.
level of expectation beyond just, having impact on the job, any of those things, right? And I think that also is true for the people, who are, reporting into that role, in
Hmm.
that I can make very clear to them from the get-go, like I'm here to basically, up level you, make you successful, and hopefully get one, maybe all of you to a point where you can run this org yourselves, right? Like my job is to be kind of that temporary stopgap of helping everybody get to the point that you need to get to. But like I'm not trying to be here in any sense of making myself a critical part of the process. In fact, quite the opposite, right? I want to think
Hmm.
about everything from the lens of here's what you need, here's how I can help you get there, but I'm going to then extract myself from that
Hmm.
almost as quickly as possible. And I kind of think about that as just how do I get my clients the best bang for their buck, right? If they have to keep
Right.
paying me over and over and over and over again to get value, then I haven't really built anything sustainable. It's kind of like the same product mindset of how do I build
Right.
something that really has user value, kind of at minimum expenditure applied to being a fractional as well. So,
Hmm.
so to kind of tie that off, I think being very transparent with, the people that you're working with, the people that are working for you about, why am I here or how am I going to approach this absolutely helps. And what I found is if I can do that right, they absolutely open up very quickly, right? I found, I really kind of just have to do about, called a 1 to 2 month road show of going around talking to everybody on the team, peers of the team, and the openness and the transparency of the opinions and the statements and the troubles and, whatever it is that I get often very much arm me with like, okay, now I know exactly everything that's going on at the company.
Right.
I know all the problems. I didn't even have to dig that hard just because people are willing to, just be very
To tell
transparent
you.
when they feel that somebody's truly on their side, there to support them, there to help, build them up, not compete with them. So it makes my job easy, frankly. It
Hmm.
again in a way that I really did not anticipate, and I don't think you can easily replicate. Maybe some senses you can replicate, but it's harder to replicate as a full-time employee.
Hmm. So really, a lot of this is coming back to that word communication, isn't it? Like being clear,
Mhm.
being concise, being open, and even like you said, sharing why you're there. I think that people
Yep.
need to know that there's no threat. I think that's the biggest thing that really scares employees or even peers is that there's a threat of Brian being there, right? In
Yes.
this case,
Yes.
we can say there's
Yep.
no threat. I'm here because I'm going to do this, and
Yep.
I'm going to be open about it, right?
Yep.
So yeah, I think it is communication that is a key piece from what I'm hearing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think in some cases, to tie back to an earlier question that you had, that does mean that you have to, set clear expectations with individuals who are
Mm,
underperforming that have not necessarily gotten that direction before. Hiring and firing has been a non-negligible component of all of the roles that I've taken on so far.
right.
But I think that's also one of the benefits of hiring a fractional versus, again, going full-time route. I think interviewed probably well over 1,000 PMs in my career, right? Uh,
Hmm.
I at least trust my ability to assess, is somebody
Hmm.
going to be able to cut it in this role or not,
Hmm.
fairly rapidly
Yeah.
based on, a relatively small number of data points, right?
Hmm.
Uh, so, being able to coach somebody up and give them exactly what they need in order to hit the bar is certainly, one of the value adds versus if I'm, coming in as a full-time person, I at least have felt that dynamic very differently, right? I think there's often a
Hmm.
pressure to say, you hired me into this culture, into this team, into this dynamic. These are the people that you gave me. I have to make it work, right? If the first thing that I do
Right.
coming into a full-time role is say, I need to get rid of the entire team, like that probably doesn't
Yeah.
look good on you at
Yeah.
all, right? Uh, Whereas, if I'm being brought in as a fractional, I feel maybe this is just me personally. I feel a lot more comfortable saying, "Listen, great people. none of them are cutting it right now. Here's what we need to do to get them up to that level,
Mm-hmm.
supplement with other hires. It's just the level of candor, I think, that you can bring when all of the expectations are on the table, I think
Mm-hmm.
really leads to a lot more action and impact.
Certainly a lot of benefits to having a fractional leader around.
Yep.
Let's sum up our conversation today. I'm wondering if do you have a tip or something that you can share with our audience that for those who are considering hiring a fractional leader, what is the tip that you want to share with them?
Yeah, so I think most of those people fit the CEO or founder model,
Mm-hmm.
whatever, right? And I think my biggest tip for people in that in those roles is open yourself up at least to the possibility that part of the problem, that is leading to your team underperforming or your product underperforming or whatever the problem you're experiencing is, lies with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Often, when I have these conversations with founders and CEOs who are considering, hiring me or another fractional, the perception, the way that they communicate these things, at least, is I have this vision. I want XYZ done. People aren't cutting it.
Mm-hmm.
They can't do it, or the technology sucks, or whatever it is, right? And then I dig into what's going on, and then 2 or 3 months later, I'm like, people can't cut it, or the technology sucks because of decisions that you have made. Right?
Mm-hmm.
The way that you've chosen to run your company, and that could be from a cultural perspective, a technology perspective, many different angles to this. But the underlying reason for these things are because of decisions that you, the CEO, have often made, right? And that is where we need to at least start the work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Open yourself up to maybe there's a different way of doing these things, reevaluate this decision, communicate this thing differently, to your team so that
Mm-hmm.
they stop, being locked into a mental model that maybe you even unintentionally locked them into. Again, many different variations of this, but it really starts real change, I guess, starts
Mm-hmm.
with the CEO or the founder or the person who's in charge of the company at some fundamental level,
Yeah.
being open to, okay, I need to do things a little bit differently if I want to get a different result, right? And
Yeah,
if they can't open
absolutely.
themselves up to that, nothing changes.
Yeah, it really is being open to be taking risk and trying something new, right?
Yep. Yes. Yep.
Absolutely. So, if our audience wanted to learn more about you or your company, is there a way they can find you online somewhere?
Yeah. Most straightforward way is to go to rootedinproduct.com, or you can look me up on LinkedIn at Brian Root, either way.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I love the conversation today and a different perspective on leadership. Thank you for your insights today.
Yeah. Thank you, Tara. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you, of course, to our listeners for joining us today. We hope our conversation with Brian offered something meaningful, an insight or a shift in perspective, or even that tip that you can put into action today. If this episode resonated with you, leave us a great rating. It truly helps us and our guests like Brian reach even more leaders who are navigating these same challenges and where these opportunities lie. And remember, you never have to lead alone. Our new Amplifying Leadership Circle community was created so leaders can grow, connect, and support one another. You can learn more about the community and all of our leadership services at amplifyingleadership.ca. Remember, everybody, leadership matters.